Hey guys, tonight we slip behind the heavy oak doors of a Tudor palace kitchen where the air is thick with goose grease steam and anxious whispers, and you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and your local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across a cold stone flagstone floor, your breath puffing in the dim morning light, as cooks shove blackened spits of meat and simmer pots of ale to the side. Historians still argue whether Tudor kitchens truly held hundreds of staff or more intimate teams of 40, but the rumor mill insists there were at least a dozen cooks, scullery maids, and underlings whispering rumors of poison behind every steaming tureen. Your heart hammers as you approach a long table strewn with crusty bread, salted fish, and congealed almond milk, the humble breakfast of a palace where even the lowliest servant fears the king's plate. Fact, back then, King Henry VIII employed dozens of attendants in his kitchens, and food tasters served as an official guard against assassination by poison. Quirky tidbit, some dinner guests kept page boys in fancy livery on standby to vomit if trouble struck. Talk about a worst-case scenario roommate. You still taste that cold, sour tang on your tongue, imagining you're that page boy, hoping to avoid the queen's displeasure. The clang of copper pans echoes from a distant corridor, reminding you that a single slip could end your life, yet you're here by choice, or more likely, by a twist of fate. You bend to inspect a pewter bowl of porridge. It's thick as mud and flecked with saffron threads, so bright they mock your fear. Grim-faced, you lift a spoon, the surface rippling like golden sand dunes. You pause, remember that unicorn horn powder many believed could neutralize arsenic. Well, you've no horns to mix in, only your trembling courage. You taste it's hot, cloying, and somehow under-seasoned, but it's breakfast and it's poison-free, you hope. A loud door thumps behind you and steps. The head cook, a gaunt man with a scar crossing his cheek. His gaze flicks to your lip, suspecting every twitch. He whispers that someone in court promised you the post as a favor to a disgruntled noble. That's how most tasters got the gig, less for skill, more for politics and favors owed. You swallow slowly, feeling the heat rise in your throat. You wonder how the day will go once the great hall's banqueting tables appear piled with venison swan and candied fruits so rich they gleam like jewels. Sensory detail, the kitchen smells of dripping fat and smoky embers, a gentle rumble of laughter, and curses tangled in the steam. The bristles of your goose-down tunic itch against your neck and the pewter bit. Shy of your official badge feels unnaturally heavy. You steel yourself. A taster must appear calm, even amused, as courtiers offer you bland excuses for plating mistakes, all the while scanning for an odd taste or suspicious texture, modern aside. It's like beta testing a new restaurant's menu without Yelp reviews. Except here, the penalty for a bad meal is a grim farewell. You take another spoonful this time, chewing each grain of oats as if reading hieroglyphs that might reveal poison. Historians still argue whether poisonings actually claimed more noble lives than battlefield injuries, and you realize the debate bleeds into every flavor you sense. Your eyes flick to a corner shelf, stacked with goblets, some silver, some dyed with copper oxide, to turn green if acid is present. Quirky detail, one goblet was designed to change color at the hint of vinegar, though it often misfired when the cook added too much wine. You pick the plain pewter cup instead, gulping the slightly metallic water and hoping it's safe. You've heard that the king himself sometimes sipped from an ordinary wooden trencher to fool any would-be assassins. You rise ready for the true test midday feasting rounds. You tighten the straps on your leather apron, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. The head cook nods. "Serve the pheasant next," he murmurs. You step toward the gleaming silver platter, where the bird's feathers have been swapped for glazed skin so shiny it rivals a court lady's satin gown. You breathe in its meaty aroma, a mixture of roasted hazelnut and something oddly sweet, must be sugared blossoms tucked under the skin. You slice a small piece, your knife tip quivering, and lift it to your lips. Every tingling nerve in your body screams caution. You chew deliberately, savoring the flavor. It's succulent rich, with a hint of marjoram too lightly dusted, but no rancid aftertaste, no tingle of something sinister. You swallow and wait a heartbeat. Nothing. Relief washes over you so fierce you nearly drop the dagger. A murmur ripples through the kitchen. The feast may proceed. You exhale the air wisping between your teeth like a secret. Somehow you've survived breakfast, and for now that might be the day's greatest victory. You barely finish wiping pheasant grease from your lips when someone tugs at your sleeve. A boy with a lopsided cap and a nose too large for his face gestures you forward. "They're asking for you in the solar," he mumbles and scurries away like a mouse, dodging chamber pots. You sigh. Another summons another round of peering eyes and political theatrics. But this one feels different. As you walk down the corridor, stone cold beneath your feet, despite the roaring fireplaces, you realize it's not the king who's calling. It's the Lord Chamberlain, a man with hands like pickled eels and a grin that never quite touches his eyes. He watches you enter the solar and says with no trace of ceremony, "So, you're the taster now." You nod, because anything else would be foolish. He waves a hand over a wooden box covered in velvet. "Ever wonder why they picked you?" he asks. Voice barely a whisper. You swallow your tongue dry. He leans in. "It's not courage, you know. It's convenience. Your uncle's gambling debts made you quite the bargain." You blink. Of course. Historians still argue whether food tasters were volunteers, conscripts, or cleverly disguised hostages, but in your case, it seems the choice was made well above your pay grade. You were chosen not for your palate nor your loyalty, but because you're expendable, a replaceable insurance policy wrapped in linen and fear. Still, there's a strange prestige to it. Not quite nobility, not quite servant. You're liminal. One foot in the kitchen, one in the throne room. You get to taste everything before the king does. You've eaten dishes from Spain and France that others only dream of, if they dream at all. You know the sweetness of imported marmalade and the bitterness of bad Burgundy. You've grown oddly fond of salt cod. You get the sense that this half-life, this dangerous privilege might be as close to power as you'll ever come. And you aren't alone. The others. They came by odd routes, too. There's Francis, the man with the sunken eyes and whispery voice who claims he once tested dishes for Queen Anne. He says she preferred sugared violets but wouldn't touch anything orange. It reminded her of fire, he mutters, though no one's sure what that means. Then there's young Agnes, disguised most days as a scullery maid, but called up when the Queen requires extra discretion. She once told you that the most dangerous dish she ever tasted was a strawberry tart with a bite too bitter. I spat it out, she said. Cook said it was just bad cream, but the dog who finished it died an hour later. Fact food tasters weren't always formally trained. They were often pulled from low nobility or trusted households, people too important to kill off without raising eyebrows, but not important enough to spark outrage. Quirky tidbit, a few tasters kept their own ledgers marking down every dish they sampled and whether it caused heat in the throat or itch behind the ear signs they feared might mean poison. You trudge back to the kitchen, still chewing over the chamberlain's words. Your uncle's debts. That explains a lot. You remember the letter that summoned you no formal invitation, no grand decree, just a courier on horseback and a wax seal you dared not ignore. You didn't know then what the job really entailed. Now every meal is a gamble, and your fellow tasters. They've all got stories like yours. Unpaid debts, family feuds, and occasionally revenge veiled as loyalty. Today's luncheon will be simpler. Lamb with rosemary bread soaked in almond milk and dried apples rehydrated in spiced wine. As you slice into the lamb, you notice a curious sheen on the fat. You pause. Could just be the rosemary oil, but could be something more. A drop of arsenic, historians say, could shimmer like moonlight on water. You think of the unicorn horns again. There's a merchant near the docks who sells powdered narwhal tusk to frightened nobles. One vial costs more than your entire year's wages. You taste anyway. It's fine. Tender, faintly gamey, with a bright herbal kick. You exhale, still alive, still you. And then the lady-in-waiting enters. She watches you carefully, her expression unreadable. His Majesty has requested the sweetmeats from Florence, she says. You nod. Those tiny sculpted sugar things shaped like birds and leaves. The Italian cook handles those, and he's a prideful man. You make a note to check the marzipan for any almond bitterness. Not all almonds are created equal. Bitter ones can kill. Historians still argue whether the food taster's real job was to detect poison or merely to die in place of someone more important. But in your experience, it's both. You're expected to live, but also expected to not live too long, if you know what I mean. You're both shield and sponge, absorbing every suspicion, every accidental flavor, every sigh from the queen when a pie is too dry. You head back toward the long table, where the sweetmeats now rest, each one delicate, beautiful, and slightly terrifying. You think about Francis again, and his mutterings about fire and violets. You think about Agnes and the dog. You think about your uncle and the dice, and then you reach for the first one shaped like a tiny swan. Just another bite. You wake at dawn with the bitter aftertaste of fig paste in your mouth and the distant sound of someone throwing up in the next chamber. Not exactly an inspiring start. But this is your life now, chewing through dread one course at a time. You sit up slowly on your straw-filled mattress, brush crumbs from your sleeves, and wonder if today will be the day someone finally slips you something exciting. You know, like belladonna, or maybe just spoiled eel. Historians still argue whether food tasters had an established daily routine or lived like soldiers awaiting orders. But for you, the pattern is always the same. Wake, wash poorly, eat something that looks like it could be safely ignored, then head down to the kitchens before the other rats get to the bread. You're part of a well oiled, grease stained system now, and like any system, it doesn't care if you're tired or terrified. You enter the kitchens and are greeted by a predictable haze of smoke, clanging pots and arguments over rosemary sprigs. One of the kitchen boys waves a ladle at you like it's a sword. They're trying smoked goose again, he says, waggling his eyebrows. You know what happened last time. You do. It involved a noblewoman fainting and a dog running in circles before collapsing dramatically beside a breadbasket. The goose had been fine, it turned out. The wine not so much. You're handed a plate of soft bread cheese that has definitely seen better weeks and a slice of pickled turnip. Breakfast. You poke it half-heartedly. No one's trying to kill you at this hour, probably. But still, you chew slowly. Always slowly. Even if it's just turnip. The trick is to treat everything like it could be laced. And you never take a second bite until the first one's been swallowed. You're not greedy. You're alive. Quirky tidbit, there was once a food taster in the court of Edward VI who insisted on washing his tongue between each dish with watered down mead. Claimed it reset his flavor senses. More likely it numbed his fear, or just made everything taste like honey and regret. After breakfast, you go over the menu for the day. There's a mid-morning snack for the Queen almond biscuits, dusted with sugar. Lunch for the king roast beef, with spiced cherries, boiled leeks, and a pie you're fairly sure is made of pigeons. And later, a banquet for the French ambassador. That means oysters. You hate oysters. Not for the taste, but for the time window. With oysters, you have about 5 minutes to guess if they're fresh before you find out the hard way. Historians still debate whether the Tudors understood food spoilage or just chalked everything up to unbalanced humors. Either way, your stomach is already bracing itself. You start with the almond biscuits. Crunchy sweet, just a hint of bitter. You pause, bitter. You hold the half-eaten biscuit in your hand. Sniff it. Could be a bad almond. Could be a very bad almond. Bitter almonds contain amygdalin, which converts into cyanide when digested. You spit it discreetly into a napkin and glance around. No one notices. Or maybe they do, and they're pretending not to. You place the rest of the biscuits aside and leave a quiet note sampled. Slight bitterness. Recommend caution. You spell sampled wrong. Your hands still shaking. You move on to the roast beef. It's hot, freshly carved juices pooling beneath its crusted skin. You try a corner. Tender, salty, and surprisingly complex thanks to cloves you didn't expect. Safe. The cherries, too, overboiled but harmless. The leeks are mush. You're still chewing when a kitchen girl brushes past you and murmurs, "Pigeon pie smells off." You blink. You haven't gotten to it yet. That's your job. You lift the pie lid carefully. A cloud of steam wafts up, carrying the heavy scent of spice meat and something sharp, vinegar, or something more. You slice off a piece. Beneath the crust, the pigeon meat is pinkish gray, swimming in a dark, oily sauce. You hesitate, then cut the smallest possible bite. Chew, chew, nothing. You wait. Still nothing. You take a second bite, and a seed crunches between your teeth. You spit it into your palm. It's a clove. Or is it? You turn it over in your fingers. It's not like any clove you've seen. Longer, thinner, a little too perfect. You wrap it in cloth and tuck it into your sleeve. This one's going to the alchemist later. Yes, there are alchemists. This is the Tudor court, after all. Everything smells like mystery and conspiracy. The royal alchemist has a beard so long it's braided and stained with something purple. He's supposed to test suspicious foods using herbs, metals, and occasionally mice. You've seen him once or twice tossing salt onto flames and muttering. No idea if it works, but it makes everyone feel better. By the time the banquet prep begins, you're already exhausted, but there's no time for rest. You test the oysters, slimy but clean. The wine is sharp and sour and passable. The roasted chestnuts are delicious. You pocket one. You figure you've earned it. And when the ambassador arrives grand in silk and feathered hat, you stand in the shadows and watch the feast unfold. You've tasted every dish. You've sniffed every cup. You've done your job, and no one dies. Not tonight. By the time your feet drag you back to your quarters, your tongue feels like it's been scrubbed with sand and wine vinegar. You collapse on the straw mattress again, flat on your back, hands still twitching from hours of precision biting, but your mind won't let you rest. Not tonight. Not with that seed still in your sleeve. Because here's the thing. The Tudors weren't just scared of bad shellfish. They were obsessed with poison. It wasn't just a background worry. It was a sport. Whispers about toxins floated through the court more often than actual spices. You'd think they were seasoning their soup with suspicion. And why wouldn't they? Henry VIII had enemies from every direction. Foreign kings, power-hungry nobles, even the Pope. Assassination by food was silent, untraceable, and elegantly gruesome. If done right, the taster gets it first. If done poorly, the king dies at dessert. Everyone loses their heads, sometimes literally. Historians still argue whether all this fear was valid or just elite paranoia. But evidence of poisoning plots does show up in letters and diaries. And let's face it, if you were stuck in a political game where losing means exile or execution, why not try slipping a little seasoning into someone's custard tart? Tonight you visit the alchemist. His workshop is in a low, damp room beneath the palace, a place that smells like licorice candle soot and something worse. You hand him the seed in your folded cloth. He takes it with tweezers, squints, and says, might be monkshood. You blink. Wolf's bane, he adds helpfully. You ask if it's deadly. He laughs. Not if it's cooked, but if it's raw and it wasn't ground, it could numb the tongue, stop the heart. Depends on the dose. You wonder who placed it. Was it intentional? Was it practice? You don't sleep that night. By morning, the seed is forgotten by everyone else. The alchemist shrugs. The cook waves it off. Could have fallen in from the spice rack, he says, wiping goose fat from his sleeves. Could have been nothing, but nothing has flavor. That seed had intent. Fact many feared poisons like arsenic, belladonna, and hemlock, but even more feared subtle cumulative toxins, those that weakened over time. Tudor poison lore included crushed emerald powdered glass and, yes, monkshood. Whether any of these worked as advertised is still up for debate. But the fear that part was always real. Quirky detail. Some nobles kept personal tasters on demand, men or women who followed them everywhere, even into private feasts. One was famously forced to sample his employer's bathwater after a rumor spread that assassins had turned to soaking victims from the outside in. Was it ridiculous? Yes. Did it happen? Also, yes. As you move through the day, you begin to notice the poison precautions everywhere. Wooden plates less likely to react with toxins. Gold cutlery believed to be immune to contamination. Dogs stationed near royal chairs ready to eat fallen scraps. Wine diluted not for flavor, but to lessen the chance of concentrated danger, and servants who disappear suddenly off to the infirmary or the gallows, depending. And then there are the antidotes. You keep a tiny packet of dried rue leaves tucked in your sleeve. Agnes carries ground charcoal. Francis. He claims to have a bezoar stone. Yes, the undigested lump from a goat's stomach, which legend said could neutralize any poison. Modern medicine laughs, but back then, that clump of goat gut was worth more than rubies. You once saw the queen herself wear a pendant said to contain powdered unicorn horn. Of course, it was just narwhal tusk from the north. But at the Tudor table, belief is half the cure, maybe more. During tonight's supper, you're summoned to taste a dish called blancmange. You've had it before. It's not what you're thinking. It's not the jiggly dessert of modern times. This one's a sticky porridge of chicken rice, sugar, and almonds. It sounds like a punishment, but it's royal fare. You spoon a bite into your mouth and pause. Not because it tastes bad, it tastes fine, but because everyone is watching too closely. You glance at the cook. He nods. You glance at the steward. He blinks twice. That's odd. You finish the bite. Wait. Nothing. Then it hits. Not pain, not dizziness, just heat. A strange flush up the side of your neck. Could be spice, could be stress. You drink water just to be safe. Then excuse yourself. You step outside, breathing the cool evening air, trying not to imagine your windpipe swelling. It passes. Maybe it was just ginger, or maybe someone wanted to test your reactions. That's a game too. Keep the taster edgy, uncertain, easier to control. A nervous taster is a loyal one. Historians still argue whether some poisonings were staged deliberate false alarms to justify executions or scare rivals into submission. You're starting to think those historians are onto something, because tonight it wasn't about death, it was about message, and you heard it loud and clear. You return to your quarters and lie in bed again, listening to the clank of distant goblets and laughter from the feast above. You don't feel particularly noble or brave or even useful, just present. One more day, one more bite, and tomorrow there'll be fish. Morning breaks through the castle shutters like a thief, quiet, gray, and cold to the touch. You sit up slowly, rolling your jaw, half convinced your tongue has turned to lead. That blancmange from last night, it's left a sour trace like almonds, and anxiety had a baby. You blink a few times, stretch your fingers, and slip your hand under the mattress to check yes, the packet of rue is still there. Your secret stash of maybe antidote is the only thing you trust more than your own stomach. Today you're not starting in the kitchen. Today you're being summoned to the armory. Not for a sword, although at this point you wouldn't say no, but to inspect the tools of the trade. Yes, apparently being a royal food taster now comes with gear. You make your way down a stone corridor that smells like damp wool and old battles. Historians still debate whether tasters were given official equipment or if most of it was symbolic pomp. But in this case, you're handed a small polished kit wrapped in green velvet, a tasting spoon, a narrow-bladed knife, a wax-sealed journal, and most curious of all, a drinking cup made of unicorn horn, or so they say. You turn it over in your hands. It's dark-ridged and a little too smooth. Narwhal, says the armory clerk with a shrug, but it scares people into being careful, which honestly is the most useful tool in the palace. You head back upstairs, gear in hand, and walk through the morning bustle of the outer kitchens. The hearth fires are already blazing. The scullery maids are fighting over onions. Francis is there too, whispering to a cook about the silver test. You nod politely and join him. He explains it again, for the 100th time. If silver touches poison, it's supposed to change color. This is highly unreliable, of course. Vinegar changes silver, egg yolks do. A strong whiff of lemon might. But in the Tudor mind, that tarnished spoon is gospel. Quirky detail. Some goblets were made to deliberately overreact, turning black at the faintest whiff of wine. Why? Because it made the noble drinker feel protected. And if there's one thing courtiers loved more than gossip, it was visible security theater. You tuck your tools into your belt and proceed to test the morning's offerings. On the menu, porridge sweetened with rosewater duck eggs and a meat paste wrapped in pastry so flaky you'd swear it's plotting something. You start with the porridge, smells safe. Cinnamon, rose, a hint of nutmeg. You taste a small spoonful, swish it, like a wine connoisseur, and nod. You even make a note in the wax-sealed journal, porridge safe, bit dry, could use honey. The cook frowns at that. Next, eggs. You slice the first one open. The yolk stares up at you bright and defiant. You eat around the edge, cautious. Eggs are tricky. They can be bad from the inside out, but today they're just bland. Then comes the pastry. The meat inside smells off. Not sour, just not quite right. You prod it with your new knife, testing texture resistance, anything unusual. The crust flakes like old parchment. You break a corner, taste a crumb, then a second, still alive. But you set it aside anyway. Something about the smell unsettles you. You make another journal note, suspicious pastry. Investigate source. You suspect it came from the outer bakery. You also suspect the baker had a late-night visitor because rumors fly faster than roast goose around here. Fact to Tudor kitchens used herbs not just for flavor, but for balance. They believed certain ingredients could open the body or close it. parsley was thought to provoke lust, sage to sharpen wit, mint to repel disease. Whether any of this mattered for poison is another story, but it certainly made for complicated salads. You inspect your new spoon. The handle is long, the bowl shallow, made for sipping, not shoveling. You test it in your next duty, the royal ale. Ale was safer than water usually, but not always. You dip the spoon sniff, too sweet, too much honey. You sip, and immediately regret it. Not poison, just bad ale, fermented too long or not long enough. You gag politely and mark it unsafe due to taste, which gets a round of kitchen laughter. Then the steward arrives. He's tall, bony, and perpetually damp, like someone left him out in the morning dew too long. He gestures to the cup on your belt. "Bring that to the queen's table," he says. You blink, the narwhal one. He nods. She wants a demonstration. Of course she does. Queen Elizabeth, you've learned, enjoys theater, especially the kind where others risk their lives for her amusement. You make your way to her antechamber, nodding at the guards who eye your belt of utensils like you might perform a juggling act. You arrive to find the queen at her writing desk, surrounded by ladies-in-waiting and velvet cushions. She holds out a goblet. "Taste this," she says simply. You dip your spoon. Sip. Wine. Strong. Probably Spanish. Safe. You smile. "It's bold," you say. She arches a brow. "And the cup." You show her the horn cup. Hold it over the wine. No reaction, of course. It's a placebo. But it looks like a ritual. The queen nods, amused. "Very well," she says, returning to her ink-stained parchment. You back away slowly, cup in hand, dignity intact. Just another day with the tools of the trade. By now, you've tasted nearly everything the royal kitchens can concoct. Pigeon pie, swan neck stew, leek and apple mash, with a suspicious shimmer. But today, the menu goes sideways in a way even your seasoned gut isn't ready for. Because today is the feast of Saint Swithin. You wouldn't think the weather-obsessed bishop would inspire culinary chaos, but the Tudors took feast days seriously. That means experimental dishes, imported ingredients, and cooks attempting culinary stunts as if King Henry himself had a Michelin star to uphold. Which, let's be honest, he probably thought he did. The main course, jellied eels molded into the shape of a crown. For real, not metaphorically. Someone took slippery river creatures, boiled them into a gelatinous blob, and pressed the goo into a copper mold shaped like royalty. You're not sure whether to eat it or knight it. Historians still argue whether Tudors genuinely enjoyed these oddities, or if they just pretended to so they wouldn't offend the cook, or worse, the monarch. But here you are, spoon hovering over a twitching, translucent tiara of fish, wondering if today's the day you become a ghost with food poisoning. You take a breath, dip, slurp. It's cold, slimy, vinegary, with a chewy resistance that says you weren't meant to win this round. And yet, it's safe, for now. You move to the side dish, peacock pie, which sounds majestic until you see it. The bird's been roasted, stuffed, reassembled, and sewn back into its feathered skin, which has been lacquered until it gleams like a vanity project. The beak is open in a frozen scream, the eyes painted glass. The message: "Look what we killed for you, quirky tidbit, peacock was never truly prized for taste. It's stringy and dry, but for appearance. It was the Tudor dinner table equivalent of posting your vacation photos to make everyone jealous. Look, I ate this exotic, impractical thing. What did you have? Bread. You slice a piece and bite. It tastes like regret and cinnamon, probably intentional. Then there's the sugar sculpture. This one's shaped like a castle, complete with marzipan guards and licorice drawbridge. You're expected to nibble on the tower. You snap a corner and chew cautiously. Almond paste, lemon zest, and what may be clove or gunpowder. Hard to say. At your side, Agnes whispers, "Don't eat the moat. The jelly was set yesterday. It's breathing. You look. It is. Barely. But still. There's also something called salmagundi, which is less a dish and more a desperate buffet on one plate. Lettuce, cold cuts, anchovies, hard-boiled eggs, raisins, possibly a feather. It's as if someone asked a child to assemble lunch while blindfolded in a pantry. You take a bite, then a second. It's chaotic but edible, probably. Fact, the Tudor obsession with elaborate meals wasn't just about wealth, it was about control. Every bite reminded guests of who had the power to summon peacocks and sugar castles and strange shimmering sauces. To dine at court was to participate in edible politics, and superstition flavored every spoonful. You're reminded of the roast hedgehog you once saw carved from ground pork, spiked with almond slivers to simulate spines, and baked until it looked like a nervous porcupine. The guest of honor refused to touch it. "Bad luck," he muttered. "You ate it. You're still here." But that doesn't mean you aren't wary, because there's always that one dish, the one that's not flamboyant, not gilded, not molded into a mythical creature. The simple bowl of soup, the basic tart, the kind no one watches, because it's just background, and those you've learned are the ones you watch most carefully. Tonight it's a custard tart, plain, pale yellow, flaky edges, not a sugar sculpture in sight. You take a bite, smooth, creamy, slightly sweet, and then bitter. You pause. That again. You hold the fork mid-air, heart slowing to a crawl. You swallow. You don't want to, but you do. You check the crust, smells fine. You check the filling, speckled with nutmeg. That's normal. You take a tiny sample and press it between your fingers. No seeds, no grains. Still the taste lingers, not cyanide bitter, not that almond twang you've come to dread, but something else, like wilted herbs, or perhaps sage you whisper. Francis leans over. "Tarragon," he says. "Too old. Went woody. Tastes like mud and medicine." You sigh, not poison, just bad seasoning. Again, you realize this is the reality of your life. Not constant brushes with death, but constant brushes with almost. The near misses, the false alarms, the meals that scare you not because they're dangerous, but because they almost are. Still, there's one moment of peace. It comes at the very end of the feast, when the torches dim, the hall quiets, and the guests stagger out full of eel and ego. You stand in the kitchen doorway, sipping watered ale, watching a scullery maid scrape pigeon bones into a bucket, and you realize you made it through the day. Again, barely. The next morning, the air in the palace is tense. You feel it before you hear it. before the orders echo through the corridors, before the kitchen doors slam and the steward's voice sharpens to a whip, because the royal alchemist is back, and he's arguing again with the tasters, loudly. You arrive at the scene just in time to hear him declare, "It wasn't my vinegar syrup that caused the cramps. It was your undercooked cod." Francis' eyes half-lidded with exhaustion replies, "The cod was smoked. There's no undercooked and smoked, you mossy fraud." The Queen's doctor huffs into the room next, muttering about humors and imbalance. He's been trying to prescribe boiled fennel water to cure everything from stomach aches to suspicion. You sigh. Another food poisoning scare, though this time it's likely just indigestion from someone stuffing marzipan ducks into their mouth too fast. Still, someone has to be blamed, and that someone is often, well, you. Historians still argue whether food tasters had real authority or were mere scapegoats. But what's clear is that when something goes wrong, you get the side eye from every corner of the palace. Today, the conflict centers on the beef pasty served last night. One guest reported numbness in the fingertips. Another said their tongue felt itchy. The alchemist claims trace minerals in the salt mixture are the cause. The cook claims someone tampered with the garlic, and Agnes, practical as always, points out that maybe they just drank too much clove wine. You're called in to settle the debate. Not officially, of course, no one would give a taster that kind of power, but unofficially, you're the only one who actually ate the thing. So you recount what you tasted. Slightly dry crust, strong pepper, no bitterness, no burning, no numbness, no hallucinations, thank goodness. The alchemist snorts and holds up a crystal vial. Inside is something that glows faintly green. This, he says, is my test compound. It smells like fermented cabbage and regret. Quirky tidbit, alchemists often used complex universal antidotes made from a wild mixture of herbs, minerals, and animal products, including crushed pearls, dried vipers, and even bits of mummified flesh, imported, of course. They called it theriac. You call it no thanks. You ask what's in the vial. He smiles. Vinegar, tin, star anise, and a hint of lead. Lead. Great. That's comforting. You leave the argument mid-sputter and return to your seat in the corner next to the fresh bread loaves. You take one and rip it open. Steam escapes. Smells clean. Safe. You chew thoughtfully as the voices continue behind you. Eventually, the Queen's physician steps into the room and delivers the verdict. Mystery resolved. It was indigestion. Recommend fasting. The entire kitchen exhales. Francis rolls his eyes. Agnes laughs under her breath. The cook mutters something about burning sage to ward off bad science. And just like that, the panic fades. Fact, Tudor medicine was a dangerous mix of real observations, wild guesses, and heavy superstition. Sometimes they were right. Often they just bled you until you fainted and called it a cure. But poison, that was always personal. Poison had intention. That's what made your job so much worse. Not just the risk, but the fact that if you do feel that tingle on your tongue, someone wanted you dead, which makes your next assignment extra nerve-wracking. Nerve-wracking. You're told to visit the wine cellar. It's cold, cramped, and always smells like must and old ambitions. The royal steward suspects that someone's been tampering with the vintages adding something, taking something, or possibly just failing to rotate the barrels correctly. You descend the stairs with a torch in one hand and your unicorn horn cup in the other. The steward hands you a list: 3 wines, 1 red, 1 white, 1 amber. You must taste each and record any strange sensations. The red is sour but safe. The white is crisp, slightly metallic. Could be the cup, could be a bad batch. You spit that one out just to be cautious. The amber wine tastes earthy, a little too earthy, like someone dropped a root into the barrel and called it rustic. You sniff, take a second sip. This time you swirl it in your mouth. It tingles, not poison tingles, clove tingles, which means someone tried to spice the wine without approval. You mark it down. Unauthorized spice, recommend discard. You climb the stairs cold to your bones, wondering how many more tastings you can survive. Not physically, emotionally, because each time you lift a cup, every eye watches, every breath tightens. You are not just eating food, you're absorbing suspicion. The Queen's banquet is tonight, and the menu includes something you've never tasted before: alchemic pottage. Of course it does. You stand in the hallway, outside the Queen's private banquet chamber, staring down at a bowl of something that should not exist. It quivers. That's the first concern. The second, it's a strange grayish purple, the kind of color usually reserved for bruises and bad ideas. This is the alchemic pottage, a dish designed allegedly to balance the elements within the body. In other words, a culinary experiment in edible anxiety. The alchemist is already present, beaming with the misplaced pride of a man who thinks powdered iron and elderflower should go together in a broth. It restores the spirit, he says, adjusting his stained robes. And if the Queen finds it palatable, we shall include it weekly. You nod because arguing with a man who once tried to extract gold from goose feathers seems unwise. Historians still argue whether dishes like this were meant for health, for spectacle, or as subtle displays of power by the royal physicians. But whatever the case tonight, it's your problem, your spoon, your stomach, your survival. You dip in slowly. The pottage gives resistance, not quite gelatin, not quite liquid. You take a shallow taste. It's sour, sharp, then oddly sweet. It finishes with a metallic buzz, like someone dropped a silver coin into chamomile tea. Your mouth goes dry. Not from poison, just confusion. You wait. 10 seconds, 20. Still breathing. Agnes watches nearby, arms crossed. If you start glowing, she says, I'm throwing water on you. You appreciate her loyalty, even if it's mostly theatrical. You nod to the steward. It's safe, unpleasant, but safe. He sighs with relief and signals the servers. They'll plate it with a garnish of mint and overconfidence. Later, you sit in your usual corner as the Queen tastes her portion. She eats slowly, with the deliberate grace of someone performing a role. A murmur passes down the table. Unusual, like herbs. Is that lavender? No one dies. No one glows. You count that as a win. But things don't stay quiet for long, because halfway through the third course, grilled capon with orange slices, a taster from the outer hall collapses. His face pale, his breathing ragged. Everyone freezes. You bolt upright. The Queen drops her fork. The steward calls for the physician, and the cook just whispers, not again. fact, instances of food tasters collapsing weren't always poison related. More often, it was spoiled food heat stroke or even psychological stress. But try telling that to a noble whose spoon is halfway to their lips. You run to the fallen taster, George, a relatively new addition. You kneel beside him, feel his pulse, weak but steady. His lips are dry. You smell his breath. Wine, nothing more. Agnes crouches next to you. He drank too fast, she says. 3 cups in an hour, trying to impress Lady Hertford. You almost laugh, almost. But the damage is done. The room is on edge. The Queen waves away her plate. A murmur begins. Was it poison? Was it treason? Was it planned? You're summoned to explain, not about George, about yourself. What have you tasted today? The Queen asks. You list everything: the pottage, the capon, the tartlets, the herb wine. You're calm. You're clear. You're praying they don't ask you to sample the candle wax. She watches you with narrowed eyes. And you are well. You nod. Perfectly, Your Majesty. She stares a second longer, then gestures you away. Just like that, you're dismissed. But the atmosphere, it's ruin. The banquet ends early. The guests leave in silence. George is taken to the infirmary. You return to the kitchens in a fog. Quirky tidbit: one taster in the French court reportedly faked a seizure to avoid eating a dish he knew was laced. The poison turned out to be rhubarb leaves, lethal in the right dose. He lived barely. The cook was executed. The rhubarb still grew in the garden. You stare at the last untouched dish of the night, a simple apple compote. Sweet, harmless, comforting. You dip a spoon, taste. It's glorious. A reminder that food can be joy, not dread. But joy is rare in your profession. Historians still argue whether tasters were truly protectors or pawns, symbols of a paranoid age, or quiet heroes in stained aprons. You're not sure anymore. You clean your tools. You wash your mouth. You lie awake that night, thinking not of poison, but of the way George collapsed, the way the room froze, the way suspicion moved faster than logic. You wonder not for the first time what might happen if you fell at the wrong time. Would they believe it was an accident, or would someone seize the moment to point fingers? That's the thing about poison. It doesn't just kill bodies. It kills trust. And at court, that might be worse. The next morning, no one talks about George. Not directly, anyway. You overhear whispers, of course, servants exchanging sideways glances, cooks avoiding eye contact when his name nearly slips into the conversation. But no one says it outright, the fear that what happened to George wasn't an accident, that someone had planned it, timed it, that maybe it was meant for someone else. You stir your morning porridge in silence. It's gray, gluey, and clings to your spoon like it knows too much. Agnes sits beside you, chewing a crust of bread like she's interrogating it. George will live, she finally says. But they're not letting him back in the kitchens. You nod. No surprise there. Once a taster falls, they're considered tainted, unreliable. A lucky escape might be taken as evidence of disloyalty, or worse, collusion, which is why by midday, there's already talk of new testing protocols. Double samplings, 2 tasters per dish, randomized assignments. The court is spiraling, and you can feel it in the air like spoiled milk. And just as you're finishing your inspection of a rather mournful-looking fish pie, The steward arrives, his expression as tight as a cinched belt. He motions for you to follow. You're taken not to the kitchens, not to the dining hall, but to a small, windowless chamber near the back of the palace, bare stone walls, a single table, 2 chairs. The kind of room that was designed for secrets, not sunlight. Seated across the table is the Queen's advisor, Lord Halford, a man with ink-stained fingers and the smile of a man who's never meant it. He offers you a seat, then gestures toward a plate covered in linen. Custard tart, he says. Same as the one from last week. You blink. The one that tasted odd. He watches you too closely. We've reason to believe it may have been interfered with. You will taste it again. You hesitate. He raises an eyebrow. You lift the linen. There it is. Pale yellow speckled with nutmeg, innocent as always. You take a bite, then a second. You chew carefully. It tastes the same as before. Sweet, creamy, just a whisper of bitterness. You swallow and wait. Nothing. Lord Halford nods slowly. We had the remaining slice tested. The bitterness came from spoiled saffron, not poison, but he leans in. We believe someone intended for it to be questioned. Historians still argue whether Tudor courts used food tampering as a form of psychological warfare more than actual assassination. But you're starting to believe it's not about killing someone. It's about unbalancing them, making them doubt what they tasted, what they know. Lord Halford continues. We suspect a kitchen infiltrator, possibly a spy, someone with access to ingredients, but without proper clearance. We need you to watch, to listen. You're silent. He slides a small pouch toward you, inside a black ribbon. Wear this discreetly. It will mark you to those who know. You nod, you leave. You're now a taster and a watcher, a mouth and a pair of eyes. Congratulations. Quirky tidbit. Some royal households used coated garnishes like the placement of rosemary sprigs or the color of sugar flowers to communicate secret meanings at meals. An innocent dish might actually be a message or a warning. Back in the kitchens, you spot a bowl of stew waiting to be sampled. You reach for a spoon, but Agnes steps in. Let me, she says. Your face looks like you chewed a lemon and remembered taxes. You smirk, hand her the spoon. The stew is fine, but now you're watching more than just what's on the plate. You notice the boy who keeps slipping in through the side door. The cook who suddenly changed suppliers. The maid who started writing things down when she thinks no one's looking. And then there's the man in green, the one who's always almost in the room, always just missing a conversation. You don't know his name, but you see him, because now you're looking. That night, the banquet goes smoothly, but every dish you test feels like a question. The oysters are fresh, but who decided to import them from a new merchant? The pies are properly spiced, but the clove tastes stronger than usual. The wine is tart, but someone's switched the barrels again. You keep your ribbon tucked in your sleeve. You say nothing, but you note everything. And when the queen smiles at her plate, you allow yourself a breath. Not relief, just acknowledgement. Another night survived, another round of edible espionage. You lie in bed later, the taste of custard still lingering, and you realize the real poison might not be in the food. It might be in the doubt. The kitchens are quieter now. Not silent. There's still the crackle of fires, the thump of knives on chopping blocks, the eternal bickering over who misplaced the nutmeg, but the laughter has dulled. The chaos has corners. You feel it in the way the serving boys glance over their shoulders, in the way the cook double checks the vinegar casks, in how no one eats unless they absolutely have to. Something's shifted, and that something may have crept in through the pantry. It starts oddly enough with custard again. You're beginning to resent custard. A fresh batch is prepared for the Duke of Suffolk, a man who believes desserts are a sign of divine favor and who once ate 6 quince tarts in one sitting. The custard smells fine, tastes fine. No bitter notes, no gritty texture, no metallic twang. But you notice something else. The eggs are wrong. Not bad, just unfamiliar. Different color, different smell. You raise an eyebrow at the cook. He scowls. They're fresh. From where? Delivered this morning, marked royal use. You glance at the crate. There's a wax seal, but it's new. The wax hasn't even fully cooled. You touch it, it crumbles. Forgery. Historians still argue whether Tudor palaces had systematic food inspection or just relied on fear to keep people honest. But forgery, that's a new ingredient in the kitchen. You inform the steward. The eggs are discarded. The crate is removed. But the question remains, who switched them? You start asking around. That's when the whispers begin. A pantry boy was seen talking to a man at the garden wall. A sack of flour went missing and returned the next day, but lighter. And then there's the baker, new, eager, always helpful, but somehow knows your name. You never introduced yourself. You start watching him. During a midday break, you hide near the pantry entrance and observe. He moves quickly, confidently, doesn't flinch when bumped, laughs too easily. His bread is excellent, but his timing is too perfect, and just once you see him linger too long over the jar of saffron. You step closer. He notices. He smiles. Too warm. Later, you're called to the Queen's table to test the dessert custard again, of course. You've begun to suspect the Tudors invented anxiety by inventing custard. The baker presents it himself, beaming. You take the spoon, dip, taste. It's fine. No bitterness, no heat, no numbness. But your tongue tingles, not from poison, from mint. A tiny amount, barely there, but enough to notice. You glance at the Queen. She hasn't touched hers yet. You clear your throat and step forward. May I request a second sample? Your Majesty? She raises a brow. Is something wrong? You don't answer. Just lift the bowl and sniff again. There it is, mint. In a dish that should have no mint. You turn to the baker. He freezes, then runs. Chaos. He bolts through the hall, knocking over a servant, scattering orange peels and spoons. Guards rush in, swords drawn. He makes it to the corridor before slipping on spilled wine and crashing into a tapestry with all the dignity of a sack of cabbages. He's hauled away. The custard is destroyed. The Queen, she doesn't flinch, just dabs her mouth and says, "Find out who sent him." You do. Turns out he wasn't a baker. Not really. A distant cousin of a disgraced noble, eager for revenge, planted in the kitchens under a forged letter of recommendation. He'd trained just enough to make a convincing pie. Quirky detail. There are recorded cases of Tudor kitchen infiltrators, not all of them deadly. One man posed as a cheese merchant just to get a glimpse of the king's mistress. Another smuggled political pamphlets inside goose livers. This one, he wasn't after gossip. He wanted to poison a single dish, one he said later meant to cause discomfort, not death. A message, a warning. He confessed under pressure. You didn't ask what kind. Fact poison was often used not to kill, but to intimidate. A touch of belladonna in wine could blur vision. A dash of foxglove might slow the heart. The goal wasn't always murder, it was fear. Make the enemy sweat, make them hesitate. You write a full report, you're thanked quietly. The kitchens return to something like normal, but your name, it travels. Now servants nod when you pass. Guards recognize your face, and one night a page hands you a folded note. No seal, just a single sentence written in rushed ink. You were not the target. You sleep poorly that night, because if you weren't the target, who was? By morning, the air around you hums with silence. The kind that's loud in all the wrong ways. No one mentions the note. No one even hints at the baker's name. It's as if the entire court reached a silent agreement to pretend it never happened. The incident has been wiped clean, like a greasy plate scrubbed to a nervous shine. Only the memory clings stubborn as dried custard. But you don't have time to brood, because today the Queen is hosting a private dinner. That's not rare. What is rare is that the guest list includes a foreign dignitary, a Jesuit scholar, and the Queen's apothecary. If that sounds like the setup to a dangerous joke, it's because it is. And you've just been assigned a new role, shadow tasting, which is not as cool as it sounds. It means you'll taste the Queen's food before it even reaches her chamber. In secret, wearing plain clothes, watching from the edges of the feast like a shadow in human form. You'll be given no seat, no name, no credit. If something goes wrong, you're the disposable ghost. No applause, just silence. You don the plainest tunic you own. Ditch the badge. Tuck your unicorn horn cup into a hidden pouch. It clinks softly with every step, like a reminder taste or be tasted. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth I truly used hidden tasters or simply relied on her famously sharp instincts. But many agree she was deeply cautious, especially as the threats around her grew subtler. Not daggers, not armies, but spoons. You slip into the shadows of the antechamber as the plates are prepared. This is a meal not for performance, but persuasion. The dishes are simpler: cold fowl fig, compote rice cooked in almond milk, and a warm tart of quince and thyme. And this time, someone else gets there first. A young woman, barely older than a maid. She tests each dish with care, efficient, calm, professional. You realize she's the Queen's personal taster, and you've never seen her before. You approach her cautiously. I thought I was assigned to these dishes. She doesn't look up. We're both assigned, she says. Layered defense. Of course, she finally turns to meet your gaze and smiles. Not warm, not cruel, just knowing. I'm Isolde, she says. I serve Her Majesty. Quietly, she tests the fig compote next, scoops it, sniffs, sips. Too much rose water, she mutters, scribbling in a tiny notebook. They're trying too hard. You test it too. She's right. Over floral. A distraction maybe, or a mistake. You begin comparing notes, tasting together. Quiet nods, sparse words. There's a rhythm to it, a strange intimacy between two people who chew in silence and try not to die. Quirky tidbit Elizabeth Thurper's table was rumored to have at least 3 layers of food testers, one official, one secret, and one posing as a servant nearby, always ready to intervene or disappear. Isolde gestures to the quince tart. Last dish, you first. You oblige. It's warm, buttery, a little tart, a little earthy. Time lingers at the back of your tongue. You wait, still, calm, safe. You hand it over. She bites, then nods. The apothecary brought that recipe, she says. I trust him about as far as I can throw a wine cask. You chuckle softly, that far. Less. Fact, Elizabeth's personal physicians were often at odds with her kitchen staff. Herbal remedies clashed with imported delicacies. What was medicine to one was madness to another. The queen navigated it all like a swan serene above furious paddling beneath. The dishes are cleared. The queen enters radiant and sharp-eyed. She glances at the food, then at the empty chair beside her. The Jesuit, late, or intentionally delayed. You watch every movement, the way the queen picks up her spoon, the way the apothecary smiles too wide, the way Isolde lingers one step closer to the dais than necessary. You realize this isn't just tasting anymore, it's guarding. The queen takes a bite of the tart, chews, nods, and then nothing. No drama, no collapse, no gasps. Just dinner. Afterward, Isolde approaches again, hands you a folded note. You expect a thank you, or maybe another warning. Instead it reads, watch the fig vendor, he's not from London. You look up, but she's already gone, disappearing into a crowd of silk sleeves and powdered wigs. You pocket the note, and you start thinking maybe this job has never been just about food. Maybe it's always been about listening to taste, to tone, to silence. Because poison doesn't always arrive in a goblet. Sometimes it wears a smile. The fig vendor. He arrives just before sunrise, pushing a cart with wheels that squeak like guilty thoughts. His cap is too new, his boots too clean, and his figs almost too perfect. Deep purple skins, just enough give when pressed. No rot, no bruises, not a single one out of line. And that's the problem. In Tudor England, nothing is that perfect. You watch from behind a stack of firewood, pretending to sort kindling. The vendor speaks little, nods a lot, smiles too easily, says he's from Surrey. But when asked what the weather's like in Surrey this week, he says windy while the sky's been calm for days. A small lie, but lies are like cloves, one is never alone. You follow him as he unloads his cart near the larder. The kitchen steward signs the delivery. You note the basket he leaves behind a different weave from yesterday's. Thicker handles, a false bottom. Historians still argue whether infiltrators truly smuggled poisons through food supplies or whether those were exaggerated tales spun by paranoid nobles and overeager playwrights. But sometimes the simplest delivery is the one no one checks. And right now, this fig basket is whistling suspiciously in your direction. You wait until the vendor leaves, then you approach the basket pretending to inspect other crates. A quick feel along the bottom confirms its hollow compartment. You pry it open, careful not to disturb the top layer of fruit. Inside, a folded scrap of cloth and a small glass vial. You lift it into the light. It glows faintly blue, not a good sign. You don't open it. You've been in this job long enough to know better. Instead, you wrap it carefully, tuck it inside your apron, and take it to the only person who can make sense of it, the alchemist. He looks worse than usual today. Ink-stained hands, eyes red, from sleepless nights, beard singed at one corner. You hand him the vial. He sniffs, tastes a dab on a silver stick, waits. Belladonna, he says. Diluted, enough to confuse, not to kill, unless concentrated. You frown, so sabotage. He nods, to delay, disrupt, maybe to discredit a host. You think of the Queen's dinner, the Jesuit guest, the apothecary, the figs, the tart. The layers are unfolding like a pastry under too much heat. Later that afternoon, the steward summons you to a quiet room. You expect a reprimand. Instead, you find Lord Halford again. He offers no greeting. Do you know how many people you've made nervous this week, he says. You stay silent. Good, he answers for himself. That means you're doing it right. He hands you a scroll, a new assignment. You'll oversee the midwinter banquet, unofficially. You unroll it. The guest list is long. Nobles, diplomats, a bishop, a playwright, and most notably, a name you recognize from whispered threats, Lord Allerton. You raise an eyebrow. Halford shrugs. He's returned from exile. Her Majesty wishes to evaluate his loyalty through pudding. He smiles thin and sharp through vigilance, and yes, sometimes pudding. Fact, the midwinter banquet was often used by Tudor royalty, not just as celebration, but as stagecraft, an elaborate performance where food, seating, and order of service all conveyed power and punishment. An overcooked roast could mean disgrace, a poisoned pear treason. You accept the scroll. That night you walk the storage cellars, double-checking every barrel, every crate. You make the cooks recite their spice lists twice. You assign Frances to wine, Agnes to sweets. You reassigned 3 new hires to laundry just in case. You even clean your unicorn cup. Then just before sleep, you find another note slipped under your door, written in the same rushed hand. The apothecary meets the fig vendor. Dusk. Orchard Gate. You stare at it. You don't know who keeps sending these, but they're watching too. You tuck the note into your journal, and you realize something. You've become more than a taster. You're a spy, a sentinel, a mouthpiece for caution, a barrier between the crown and chaos. Quirky Tidbit, one food taster in the Ottoman court, was so trusted he eventually became head of palace intelligence. Another in the Habsburg court allegedly used coded spice arrangements to communicate threats. You're not quite there, but you're getting close. And as the midwinter banquet looms, you sharpen your senses like knives, because someone's coming hungry, and they're not here for the roast. You wake on the morning of the midwinter banquet, before the bells ring, before even the geese in the courtyard have the good sense to honk. Today your heartbeat arrives ahead of the sun. The palace is dressed for performance. Icicle-shaped sugar sculptures stand like sentinels on sideboards. The long hall has been strewn with evergreen boughs, and someone, probably the steward's wife, has placed rosemary sprigs in the torches for scent. The smell of burnt pine and roasting meats fills the air like a thick spell, and you're already exhausted, because this banquet isn't just about food. It's about watching everyone. You begin with the wine cellar. Francis is already down there, bleary-eyed but focused. He tests 4 barrels of claret, 3 of sherry, and something murky brought in from Calais. The last one smells like burnt raisins and bad choices. You veto it on instinct alone. Upstairs, Agnes reports on the sweets. The marchpane is safe, the jellied fruits slightly too wobbly. She tastes each one without flinching. She has that look in her eye again, the one that says she's already imagining worst case scenarios. You've both been in the job too long. Historians still argue whether Tudor banquets were truly ceremonial or thinly veiled interrogations. But when your job involves spooning moose with one hand and reading facial expressions with the other, the answer becomes obvious. The midwinter banquet isn't a party, it's a test. Lord Allerton arrives just after sunset, cloaked in sable, smiling too broadly, exiled 3 winters ago for so suspected treason, now back apparently forgiven. But no one believes that forgiveness is permanent, least of all him. You spot him slipping something into his goblet as he takes his seat. You approach. "May I freshen that for you, my lord?" He hesitates, just a beat, then nods. "Of course, I was merely—" He trails off, already knowing it's too late. You take the goblet, swirl it under your nose. Rosemary, citrus, and something metallic. Quirky tidbit. Some nobles carried flavor powders to mask inferior wine or impress guests, but a few, like Allerton, used them to create controlled reactions. A numbing tongue, a momentary flush, just enough to pretend illness or cast doubt. You pour out the wine. Replace it with fresh. He nods. Doesn't thank you, but he knows you know. The first course is served. Pottage with saffron and crushed almonds. You've already tasted it earlier, twice. It's clean, warm, forgettable. The kind of dish that lets guests ease into their schemes without too much salt. Then comes the roast goose, surrounded by blackcurrant sauce and baked apples. You'd like to enjoy it, but your focus is on Lord Allerton's fork. He's too precise, too rehearsed. You count his bites, note when he drinks, and when he doesn't. The Queen raises her goblet. "I am grateful for all who dine with me this night," she says, "but more grateful still for those who do not hide behind sugared words." That's aimed at someone. Everyone knows who. She takes a bite of her goose. Your breath pauses. Nothing happens. She smiles. Course after course rolls on venison and red wine, pears soaked in clove syrup, a pastry shaped like a boar's head, with eyes made of dried plum. You've tested them all. Your stomach protests, but your nerves are louder. Fact. In some courts, tasters were forced to eat an entire serving of a dish before royalty would even look at it. You thank your lucky stars. This court has some faith left in spoonfuls. As dessert arrives, warm honey tarts with rosemary crust, you see it. A servant hands a plate to Lord Allerton. The tart is identical to the others, except for one detail. A single candied violet on top. No other tart has it, and you didn't taste that version. You move fast. Intercept the plate. Allerton has an allergy. You lie smoothly. The garnish must be changed. Gasps ripple down the table. Allerton stares at you, stiff, pale. You lift the violet with your knife. Set it on a small linen. Smell it. Then cut it open. Inside a powder, faint, greenish. The alchemist is called. He takes it, examines it under his smoky glass. Not fatal, he says, but enough to swell the throat. Cause panic. You look at Allerton. He stares straight ahead. The queen says nothing, simply lifts her goblet again. A pity, I do enjoy candied flowers. And just like that, the feast continues. No arrest, no exile, just the knowledge that everyone saw, everyone knows. Later that night, as the hall is cleared and the torches dim, you find yourself alone with the alchemist. He hands you the linen with the crushed violet. You were quick, he says. The queen noticed. You nod, too tired to answer. She may ask for you tomorrow, he adds, for more tasting. He smiles. For more trust. You tuck the linen away. Your badge may say taster, but tonight, you were the blade hidden in the pastry. You don't sleep. Not because of fear, though there's always a flicker of it, but because your body has learned not to trust rest after a banquet. Your mind races through every detail of the night, the glint in Lord Allerton's eye, the timing of the violet, the queen's deliberate nonchalance. She didn't flinch. She didn't need to. She had you, and now that means something. By morning, your role has changed. No one announces it, of course. There's no ceremony, no parchment decree or procession of trumpets. But you feel it when the guards nod at you with something more than indifference. When the steward defers to your judgment on a batch of oysters. When even the head cook asks if you'd prefer to inspect the new grain shipment personally. You're not just a food taster anymore. You're a presence, a quiet one, but potent like rosemary and wine. And that's dangerous, because the higher you rise in trust, the more you're seen by people who don't want you there. You've barely begun sampling the morning bread when a folded note arrives delivered by a stable boy with hay in his collar and panic in his eyes. You unfold it slowly. Just one line. You missed one. You freeze. What did you miss? You replay last night, every dish, every bite, every glance. The goose, the tart, the poisoned violet. Nothing else was out of place. Was it a bluff? You rush to the cold pantry, retracing your steps, pulling open baskets and checking for leftovers. One of the honey tarts remains half-bitten, dropped beside a scorched serving tray. You sniff it. Normal. You taste. Still normal. But something underneath is wrong. The crust too dense. The filling too dark. You scrape a finger along the edge and spot it, a thin, glossy smear that doesn't belong. Hidden beneath the pastry shell, a layer that was never supposed to be there. You cut it open. There between the crust and the honey, a brown paste, nutty, sharp, almost sweet, familiar, walnut. You blink. You remember now Lord Marlowe, seated 2 chairs down from Allerton, has a severe nut allergy. His servants have warned the court more than once. Last night he didn't finish dessert. He left early, pale. You drop the tart and run. Historians still argue whether allergy-related food tampering in Tudor times was accidental or malicious, after all modern science hadn't identified allergies the way we do today. But that doesn't explain why someone hid the nuts. You find Lord Marlowe in his chambers, alive but ill, vomiting, breathing shallow. The apothecary is already there. So is Isolde. She doesn't look surprised. Sabotage, you ask. She nods, not meant to kill, just to shame him, humiliate him in front of foreign guests, by nearly collapsing him, by making him appear weak, cowardly, vulnerable. You clench your fists. This wasn't about power. It was about cruelty. Court politics delivered under layers of honey glaze. You return to the kitchens and interrogate the dessert team. One of the assistants, the youngest, cracks after 10 minutes. I was told to add it, he says, sobbing. Said it was for texture, for the Queen's new recipe. I swear I didn't know. Said by who, but he can't or won't name anyone. Quirky tidbit. Some Tudor cooks left secret kitchen markings, scratches in stone, or baked into codes using the placement of spices to indicate sabotage or blame. A twist of cinnamon toward the east might mean not my fault. A peppercorn placed off center. Beware this dish. You begin checking. In the honey tart tray etched faintly into the corner with a paring knife, a small X. Not the assistant's mark. Someone else signed this meal. You show it to Isolde. She matches it to a former palace clerk, dismissed last spring. A sympathizer of Allerton. You're assembling a web dish by dish. Fact food was one of the most powerful political weapons in Tudor England, not just as poison, but as propaganda. Who sat where, who ate what, who wasn't served at all, every bite was a message. And tonight you have one more course to deliver. You prepare a tray of saffron cakes for the Queen's evening council. You test every one. Then to the side you add a small harmless fig, dry, unsweetened, sour enough to make someone flinch. You watch as Lord Allerton picks it up. He chews. He flinches. The Queen notices, smiles faintly, and continues her meeting. She never speaks to you, not directly, but that night your cup, normally wood or pewter, is swapped for gold. No explanation, no fanfare, just gold, recognition without words. And you sit back in your quiet corner of the hall and sip water laced with nothing but mint. You feel it in the air before you see it, a shift subtle but undeniable. The kitchens are cleaner, the halls quieter. And when you enter the great dining room that morning, your place is already set, a first. The cup is there too, the gold one. It gleams in the candlelight like it knows something you don't. It makes no sound when lifted, which unnerves you more than it should. The Queen has not summoned you, not officially, but everything from the polished cutlery to the bowed heads of the stewards says she doesn't need to. You are now expected, but the job hasn't changed. The suspicion never leaves. If anything, it's deepened. You no longer just protect the crown from poison, you protect it from uncertainty. You are the buffer between a whisper and a crisis, between a fig and a fatal misstep. Today's menu is simple, almost suspiciously so. Boiled chicken with leeks, oat cakes, warm milk spiced with nutmeg. Nothing fancy, nothing gilded, a meal meant for digestion, not display. And yet your guard doesn't drop. Historians still argue whether such humble meals were genuine or merely part of the court's greater theater, a performance of modesty to lull enemies into thinking the crown could be approached casually. You know better. You taste each dish methodically. The leeks are fresh. The chicken is bland but honest. The oatcakes are tough, no surprise, but clean. The milk is warm, soft on the tongue, fragrant, safe. Still, you sip in sips, never gulps. You've learned too well. You've also learned how to watch. And as the Queen dines, you notice small things, how Lord Halford's fingers drum faster than usual, how Agnes across the hall seems distracted, how the Queen's gaze lingers longer on her cup before drinking. Something's coming, not tonight, but soon. You finish your duties and return to your chambers. The corridor is dim, the torches low. A servant passes you, and nods, but oddly, too fast. You slow your pace, turn. He's gone. You check your door. Another note. This one is different. Folded tightly, clean script. Your vigilance has bought us time, but they are watching you now. No signature. You sit heavily on your bed. Let the gold cup rest beside you. It catches no light now, just reflects your own tired face back at you. Fact, many royal tasters were never remembered, their names lost to fire, to politics, to time. But every crown sat steadier because they did their work quietly and thoroughly. You never expected thanks, but you did expect to matter, and lately you do. The next morning, Isolde finds you in the orchard, where the frost clings to branches like lace. No fig vendor today, she says, voice low. No banquet either, you reply. She nods. It's a calm day, for now. You both chew oat cakes, not because you're hungry, but because chewing has become a habit of survival. Quirky tidbit. Some tasters swore by chewing fennel seeds before every shift it was said to clear the tongue and sharpen the mind. You never found it helpful, but you understand the need to feel prepared. As you walk the palace that day, everything feels quieter, as though the castle itself is holding its breath. A pause between plays. You pass the queen's chamber. She's not there, but her plate is, and on it, a single apple, untouched. You pluck it up, turn it in your hand, smell it, test it. Safe. Everything for once is safe. And so when night falls and no banquets await you, you finally sit on your straw mattress with nothing to chew, no sauces to decode, no tarts to dissect, just silence, just air. You lie back and close your eyes, and for the first time in weeks you sleep, not because the danger is gone, but because you've outlived it. For now, the castle sleeps now. Even the fire in the great hearth has curled into embers, glowing like sleepy eyes beneath a woolen blanket of ash. Outside, frost kisses the windows, tracing soft silver lines down the leaded glass. Somewhere, a guard shifts his weight and mutters to himself. A cartwheel creaks in the distant courtyard, but the palace exhales. You lie still. The scent of the kitchens clings faintly to your clothes. Rosemary honey, wood smoke, familiar now, reassuring in its own strange way. Your limbs sink heavier into the straw mattress, like they've finally been granted permission to let go. The gold cup sits where you left it, catching the last flicker of candlelight and holding it without fuss. You think of all the things it's tasted, all the fears it's absorbed, and how something so quiet could still mean so much. The crown is safe, the queen is sleeping, and so finally can you. Your breath slows. The palace walls feel warmer now, like they've settled for the night-heavy stone, softened by stories. You drift gently past thoughts of violet petals, of tart crusts, and bitter almonds, of whispered warnings, and vanished footprints near the orchard gate. All of it fades. Even the tension between your shoulders dissolves, replaced by the weightless peace of a task fulfilled. You were the watcher at the gate, the first bite, the silent oath, and now you are simply still. Let it go. Let your jaw unclench. Let your heart step down from its post. There is no spoon in your hand, no cup at your lips, no eyes watching from across the hall. Only quiet, only you, only sleep.